There is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man.
In a subreddit titled Tulpas, you will find dozens of accounts of people allegedly creating tulpas on a whim, having romantic relationships with her creation, and even tulpas logging into Reddit in order to create lengthy lamentations. According to the main group's information, a tulpa is similar to an imaginary friend. But let's find out what occultists have to say about tulpas. A tulpa, sometimes referred to as a thought form, is the physical manifestation of thought into a being, often used for a specific task, but which can often turn autonomous, poorly referred to as the imaginary friend. Because as you will see, it is not imaginary and often it is not a friend. Alexandra David Neal, credited with writing 30 books about Eastern religion, philosophy, and her travels, along with being the first European woman to visit Lhasa in Tibet when it was forbidden to foreigners, describes the creation of tulpas as, "The practice is considered as fraught with danger for everyone who has not reached a high mental and spiritual degree of enlightenment and is not fully aware of the nature of the psychic forces at work in the process." She goes on to write, "Once the tulpa is endowed with enough vitality to be capable of playing the part of a real being, it tends to free itself from its maker's control. This, say Tibetan occultists, happens nearly mechanically, just as the child, when his body is completed and able to live apart, leaves its mother's womb. Sometimes the phantom becomes a rebellious son, and one hears of uncanny struggles that have taken place between magicians and their creatures, the former being severely hurt or even killed by the latter." The creation of the tulpa is a lengthy process, requiring months of meditation under isolation among other mental feats. A true tulpa is not something that someone just decides to create out of boredom or because they want a girlfriend, as we find on Reddit. Alexandra went on to create a tulpa, which required her placing herself in isolated meditation and, as she describes it, other rites. And after months, her phantom was created. Sometimes this tulpa would even appear when she did not want him to, and on one occasion she felt him touch her shoulder, on another she felt his robe. Alexandra created her tulpa to be a jolly-looking monk, short and heavy, but after time the tulpa began to change, his behavior from pleasant to troublesome and bold, becoming lean with a mocking, sly, malignant look. This practiced woman lost control, and other people were witness to this tulpa. It was not only a figment of her imagination. She goes on to describe wanting to get rid of the phantom, and it took 6 months of what she describes as a hard struggle. Nothing about this reputable account indicates the relatively easy creation of an imaginary friend, much less an entity receptive to intimacy, as reported on Reddit. Annie Besant, a theosophist and author of over 300 books and pamphlets, aptly describes the formation of thought forms as created in definite meditation by those who through long practice have learnt how to think. The meditation being referenced here is not the same meditation that you find at your local yoga group. While that form of meditation has plenty of benefits, the meditation being referenced here is incredibly difficult to achieve, and as such is achieved by very few. It is so difficult to achieve the level of meditation referenced here that there are charlatans in the East who claim to have reached it in order to gain fame or disciples. When Alexandra says that it took her months to create her tulpa, she is referring to an intense, all-encompassing, deep focus, which those who have achieved find hard to describe in words, but that requires determined mental and physical feats. The meditation being described by Alexandra generally refers to one closing themselves off from the rest of the world. A normal home won't work since there are too many distractions and too many distracting sounds where silence is required, and zero contact is permitted aside from someone outside of the empty room that the practitioner will stay in for up to a year. Typically, a separate building is constructed for this specific purpose. The person who brings food will leave it outside of the room and ring a bell or knock as to not disturb the practitioner inside of the room. If their carer forgets to bring food, then the practitioner will not eat. It is not permitted to call someone, make food for yourself, or leave your room. In some instances, the practitioner will write a note on what he requires, but that is not always the case. The person inside of the room covers the windows to not be distracted by the sky. There are more intense variations, such as closing yourself off in an empty room with the addition of complete darkness, no windows or light. Some people live in these as a sort of grave until death, though that is noted as being rare. There is a very big difference between a strong imagination with the ability to voice multiple characters in your own mind and the ability to create an actual third-party entity that appears to others and disobeys you. The so-called phenomena of the creation of an independent, imaginary friend with a will of its own, as being described in the subreddit Tulpas, is not a phenomena at all. And it is something that many authors have experienced. It is simply mental acting, imagination, hence article after article on the internet giving guidance to aspiring authors on how to get into the mind of your character, and endless accounts of authors describing a story moving on without their conscious input, but such well-developed characters that it seems effortless to write them. This is not a tulpa. If it were, Stephen King would be absolutely riddled with them. In fact, let's take a trip over to another subreddit, but rather than looking at tulpas, let's look at writers to prove the point. Getting into the mind of your characters, the author asks for advice on how to get into the mind of your character, referencing the character's headspace or frame of mind. This sounds like the type of state of mind that would give you the illusion of a character interacting with you that isn't necessarily coming from you. Let's see what an author has to say. Some people like to do interviews. I think that's one of many cool ways to explore a character. It allows you not only to reply from their perspective, thus diving into their head, but also to explore their character traits, habits, language, etc. Now, let's flip back to the Tulpas subreddit and read the corresponding parts of this so-called tulpamancer and remember what the author wrote just a moment ago. Would any of you like to formally meet my tulpas? If you guys want, I can make a post. I see a lot of people talk about theirs and show them as well, and I think it will help me better connect with mine. Do you see the similarity? The only difference is that the poster in the writer section is under no illusion that he or she is creating an actual third-party entity. Again, there's nothing mystical or magical about what people are doing on the Tulpas subreddit. They are role-playing with themselves. It is, however, possible to create a real, magical tulpa, as described by occultists, but it requires a level of personal discipline and mental fortitude that is a fleeting commodity and reserved for the very few. And with that comes the very real possibility of creating an entity that soon becomes frightening and threatening, as passingly mentioned by Alexandra in the beginning of this video when she wrote that the tulpa could kill its creator. The following story is rife with controversy over the validity of it, and while it may be fake, it nevertheless gives a glimpse of what can happen with a tulpa gone awry and seems to line up with accounts from well-practiced occultists. The case of Olivia Mabel. Olivia was a stay-at-home mother, living a comfortable life with her husband and son in Texas. However, one day, her son, 7-year-old Aiden, was found dead in a pond on their property. This tragedy destroyed Olivia, and in grief she began to disassociate with everyone around her, including her husband, and this led to their divorce. Her husband moved away, remarried, and lost contact with his ex-wife. No one had seen Olivia since September 1991. Not friends, family, or co-workers. Years passed, and on February 27, 1994, 911 received several silent calls coming from the Mabel home. When police entered the home, it looked untouched for years, dirty, and in disrepair. However, when police entered Aiden's bedroom, it was completely clean and cared for, and Olivia was sitting up in a rocking chair, grasping a stick doll effigy of her son. Olivia was dead. In the corner of the room was an altar, surrounded by drawn images of her son and letters to her son. Across the front of the altar read, Tulpa. The case was closed as unsolved. However, some interviews shed further light on the disturbing scene, with Drew Navarro, a paranormal investigator, describing it as follows. I'm not even sure this was even ever on our physical plane. In the hundreds of locations I've studied, I have never felt such an imposing force. I couldn't breathe, my heart was constantly racing. Its energy kept changing, but none of it felt inviting. Whatever is in there, it's extremely possessive and behaves so erratically, like a jealous child throwing a tantrum. As far as I'm concerned, that house and that entire property should be avoided. It needs serious intervention because I'm not sure what we're dealing with.
Simpson's initial reaction. Miss Mabel's son, Aidan Mabel, died on the property in 1990 from a drowning incident. The documents and writings found at the scene were written in an unidentified language and are currently being analyzed. Let's go. Miss Mabel was discovered deceased inside one of the rooms. Her body was found upright in a rocking chair, clutching a figure made of sticks and leaves. Judging from initial reports, Miss Mabel had been dead a matter of months. That is honestly all we know at this point. If you have any information, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Sergeant Santiago, who had spent time on the crime scene, said, I spent a lot of time in El Paso and had an uncle that was into some really dark occult stuff. I recognized it immediately. When I walked into that room and saw the symbols and the photos on the altar, I felt a strong, angry presence looming over me. It was honestly the last thing I expected to see in this town. One of the oddest parts for me, says Santiago, is the date on the letter we found, dated the very day we kicked that swollen door down. The city concluded that she post-dated everything, but I don't believe she was alone in that house, and I don't believe her spirit wasn't still in the room with us that night, but then that makes me the crazy one, right?
Well, honestly, it still just doesn't make any sense. I remember being there and it was just freezing cold inside that house and it was warm outside. She was just sitting in a chair and I can't tell, we still don't know how long she had been there for. She was just there, dead, and there was a crib in the corner. She wasn't pregnant or anything. No one found anything about that. It was just there. It was, well, very strange, I would say. There were a lot of photos and personal objects on that, and candles, and, well, it's things you actually use to see in what we call santuarios. It's like this place with personal objects of the deceased and certain, how would I describe this? It's like chants or things that are written down like a prayer. And I wouldn't recommend, even if someone put that out there, they were definitely trying to do something that I wouldn't even recommend going into. There was something just really evil in that house. It's the kind of thing that once you mess with it, it just doesn't stop.
What did that letter say that Sergeant Santiago refers to? My Aiden, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have never let it get like this. I'm leaving. I will not let you keep me, you vile, evil creature. Mommy's coming for you, Aiden, my sweet Aiden. Mommy loves you. The story of Olivia Mabel is tragic if true, and even if not, it serves as an apt cautionary tale of the dangers of creating a tulpa. What do you think? Do you think the tale of Olivia Mabel is true? Do you think the tulpamancers of Reddit are truly creating phantoms? Let me know down in the comments. Good night.